Well, from ancient days, people have looked to the heavens, fascinated at what they could see, at the same time imagining what is beyond that distant horizon. And you know, we have pretty constant opportunities to see not only the beautiful sky above us, particularly at night, but we have abundant opportunities to see special things. You can almost always find some notation of a shooting star event that is supposed to happen, or the planets when they are aligned in a certain way and a particular planet looks very bright. There are the eclipses of the moon and the sun that often we are encouraged to view as well. And unfortunately, I typically find that I hear about these things or pay attention to them after they've already happened, even though they're well publicized. Perhaps that is because we have so much ability now to know from our internet searches what is out there and what we might be able to see. But I did pay a lot of attention back in 1986. If any of you were around then, perhaps you do remember that as the year that Halley's Comet came around. It was a really big deal back then, and there was a lot of hype about it, and there were a lot of events planned to coincide when the comet would come over a particular part of our inner solar system, where we were actually able to see it. And I got excited about it, like a lot of people. And I do remember that like a lot of celestial occurrences, there was a lot of rumor and speculation about what might happen when she came around. Some people thought that calamities would occur on the earth, and others got themselves together and tried to figure out how they might capture the energy of this comet as it went by. Well, I did see the comet at a comet watching party in the winter of 1986. I joined a group of folks just off of the Foothills Parkway in East Tennessee, outside of Knoxville where I was living, in the middle of the night. And we hiked up to a place next to Look Rock, very close to there, if you know where that is. And even though it was pretty high in the mountains, you could still see the faint lights of the city behind the mountains. But still, it was a place for prime viewing. And so we hiked up there in the middle of the night, carrying our lawn chairs and our thermoses of hot chocolate so we could get a good spot to see the comet. And what I remember about that is there was an air of magic about it. I don't know if it was the hike in the dark with all these people that we really didn't know, until we sat next to them in lawn chairs for hours on that cold night, to the hush that came over the crowd as the comet began to arrive. And of course, we knew the time that she would be coming, and there were people up there with telescopes, but most of us were just sitting there looking at the night sky. And as she came around, the crowd really did become quiet. We had been laughing and partying and having a great time for hours, but something about that appearance of her over those dark mountains really was magical and mystical, even though she really just looked like a little faint cotton ball with a little faint tail coming out behind her. And just as, quickly as she had come, she had gone. And I've thought often about that and thought about how if that was happening now, as again, many of these occurrences probably do, almost everybody would have been looking at it from behind the lens, probably about this big of a little camera. And it's wonderful to capture those things and put them on Facebook and send them out there and to have them for all time digitally. But I think there's also something special about only having that memory in my mind's eye. No doubt all those years ago, the photography equipment that we had, unless it was really spectacular and done through a telescope, wouldn't have captured much of anything up in that sky. But it leaves it there in my mind to remember it, to remember how it was and how it felt, and still not to be able to put all the words to it that perhaps I might want to. And I think that's actually kind of a nice thing. Well, things happen in the skies all the time, as noted, and many of you may pay a lot of attention to that. I think it's a great way to think about who we are and what is happening in the greater world beyond us. And you don't even really have to go to the top of a mountain. Even here in the city, with as much created light as we have, we can still see, particularly this time of year in the night sky in the winter, a pretty spectacular array of God's handiwork. And again, we can look at that and imagine what's out there beyond what we can see as the world seems so still on those dark nights. Well, this morning, as we celebrate Epiphany, we have this wonderful part of the Christmas story, as Matthew tells it. And I think the star of the story is, in many ways, the star. One of the reasons I think we like this particular part of the story so much is that it does use an image that we can actually see. Many of the scriptural images, we have to think long and hard about what they might really look like, but we know what a bright star is. We know what a bright orb in the sky is, and so I think it really is easier for us to start to imagine what it might have been like and what it might be like to be captured and attentively with such an occurrence. And sometimes if we're out looking around, you know, depending on the tilt of the earth, those stars and those planets feel like they are so close you could just reach out and take one right out of the sky, even as we know in our minds that they are light years away from us. It's great to stargaze, and again, I know some of you do that regularly. And I find that stargazing, when I do it, looking at the stars and their heavenly counterparts, whether it's on an ordinary night or one that I do happen to be surprised and look up and see the shooting stars, or whether it's a night that I've planned for, like a comet watching occurrence, that when that happens, I would describe some of those times for me as being in a thin place. We've talked about those, that place between earth and heaven where we're not quite sure where we are, where we're obviously located here in this world, and yet there's a sense that the other world, the sacred, as we would call it in our religious tradition, is breaking in on us. And there's something about that sacred that we can touch and we can smell and we can taste that changes us in those thin places, so that a sense of the sacred stays with us. And what's happening there is an epiphany, if you will, a revelation, a new spiritual insight, a perspective, or an understanding of God's revealing who God is to us in ways that we've not previously experienced. Well, as we celebrate Epiphany, we recall, of course, the revelation and the appearance to the wise men that came from the east. And it is commonly thought that these men may well have been astrologers, and so it was their job to be looking at the heavens. They didn't have all of the technological things, of course, that we do, and so they looked at the heavens and they were keen observers of what was there, and then they would advise the rulers and different kinds of people on what to do based on how things were aligned. Now, of course, as with the entire Christmas story, as we have come to know it, this part is only a snapshot. It's a few scenes, although it's a few scenes that happened over a longer period of time than we typically think of when we compress everything into one performance, if you will, during a pageant. And as lovely as that is, there is space in the real story for our imaginations to wonder what might have happened, what more might have happened, and to fill in some of those imaginings through the work of the Holy Spirit. Now, sometimes it is something extraordinary that gets our attention, but very often God works in and through the things with which we are most familiar, the things that are around us all the time. So that for these astrologers, a very bright star would have been something they noticed, but they wouldn't necessarily have been compelled to change their lives because of it. Now, as the story is recorded, the moment they saw it, they knew there was something more going on. It wasn't just another bright star in the sky, and if it was similar to one that they had seen, something was different. Something else was going on in this time and in this place. Something about this star led them on a journey, and they didn't really know where they were going or how long the journey was going to be. Again, in the compressed section that we have, if you read it carefully, you recognize that they visited a child in a house, not a baby in a manger, even though, again, we put a lot of that together in the way that we think about the Christmas story. And I think it's perfectly fine whatever we do with it, because I don't know that the timing of the journey is important, because we need to know the exact time it took to arrive, to meet Jesus, the child, the toddler probably, and his parents. But it reminds us that we don't always know when we start out on a journey exactly where we're going, and we certainly may not know how long it may take. So however this event really happened, I think it is significant because it started by people looking up and out beyond themselves and recognizing then that something was happening that was bigger than they were, something unexpected that captured their hearts and compelled them to do something they wouldn't have ordinarily. Note what is happening theologically in this story. One of the very first scenes begins with them looking up at the vast heavens, and one of the final scenes has them kneeling before Jesus. Gazing at the heavens began a journey that brought them to their knees. And this whole piece is bookended with Herod and what he was doing. And so they didn't go out of the world. They didn't go on an extraordinary journey that took them away from danger and away from things they would have been afraid of. It led them right through it. And again, I think that's a significant part of the story. It begins with Herod, it ends with Herod as we look at this piece. But in the middle of that, in the midst of their lives, their ordinary lives that were now changed, in the midst of that, they saw something that compelled them to go on a journey and took them in a place they could not have imagined. Well, on this first Sunday in the new year, I know that many of us are probably working on our New Year's resolutions. And it's certainly a good idea to do that, and it's an appropriate time to take stock of where we have been so that we can evaluate where we are and consider where we want to go in the year ahead. Well, perhaps as a spiritual practice, you may want to do some stargazing in the year ahead. Whatever it means to you to stop and look up and beyond yourselves, because we believe in an amazing God who is at the same time completely beyond all time and space, and yet as close as our own breath. Looking beyond ourselves is a good reminder that whatever our circumstance, we are part of something much larger and much grander than we can imagine. Now, I know that as we begin this year, many of you are wondering how to put one foot in front of the other, let alone take time to stargaze. You don't know how the bills are going to be paid or whether you can keep your job or find one. You're concerned about your health or the health of those you love. And I know that many are living with a broken heart or a broken mind or a broken body. And for many of you, grief seems overwhelming. Well, then consider the counsel of Barbara Brown Taylor from her book, Learning to Walk in the Dark. And I have noted that as the people's preparation in your bulletin. She says, "The night sky will heal me, not by reassuring me that I will be just fine, but by reminding me of my place in the universe. Looking up at the same stars that human beings have been looking at for millennia, I find my place near the end of a long, long line of stargazers who stood here before me." Being reminded of our place in the universe is an important part of our faith. We are neither too big nor too small. We are not greater than anyone else, but we are not forgotten. And we all see the same sky from different perspectives, and surely that is part of God's master plan, that there would be many lenses through which we experience God and many ways to express what we believe. And the same God that compels us to look up requires us to kneel before him as well. The more weighed down we are with the things we are dealing with, the more we need to remember that we do not journey alone. And looking up, we reclaim a sense of the wonder and awe that then drenches us in the reality that the kingdom of God is breaking in right here and right now. That's what happened to the wise men. They looked up, and in a sense of wonder and awe, they went on a journey where they literally then found their God. And so as we enter this new year, in the words of the prophet Isaiah, lift up your eyes and look around.